So for example, there are triangular craft. And I just happen to have a slide here. Oh, there it goes. So this was reported by a Navy officer stationed in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And he contacted me through LinkedIn, and he wanted to know how to get this information to this new, at this time there was a task force on UAP that had just been established, and he wanted to know how to get this information to them. And he was driving with his sunroof open, and he looked up and he saw this thing flying over his car. And it was moving slightly faster, but not much faster than his car. So he got a really good look at it for a period of several minutes. And he did this very detailed sketch. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is that people all over the world report almost exactly the same thing, and they have been since at least the 60s, probably the 50s. Almost always a light in each corner, almost always black, almost always at night, almost always light in the center, almost always soundless and low and slow. And let's see here, so here's an article from 1960, and you can see this report that made the newspapers, and you can see how closely this object resembles the object that this Navy officer reported in 2017, half a century later. And in fact, there were many other reports of this kind, and there's a considerable amount of raw data on this in terms of letters, hand-drawn sketches from that period. So triangles, maybe a new phenomenon, I want to talk about the drones a little bit, but triangles, orbs, like balls of light. We don't see this so much anymore, but fireballs. The occasional these white tic-tac craft, and nobody knows if they have a common source or different sources, and their behaviors are somewhat different. Sometimes they're like in the Phoenix Lights, they're more of a boomerang-shaped thing.
In your opinion, when there are credible UAP sightings, is there an inarguable corollary with extraterrestrial beings, even, I'll ask, at the controls?
My first thought about that, my inclination has always been to think that if there is an extraterrestrial connection, it's probably some kind of AI. It's probably not biological. We can see the trajectory of where our own technology is going. We already have craft that have left the solar system, Voyager 2, Voyager 1. We can see where this is going with AI right now very clearly if you just map that out. And so that is my first inclination, to think it would be something unmanned, somebody else's space program. Not surprising that somebody else might discover us before we discovered them. But there's some information circulating that suggests that it might not be that simple. That might not be the case.
I saw you say in a documentary that you consider the solid credibility of many sightings of UAPs to be the greatest, and this is your quote, the greatest human discovery in history.
Yes.
So two-part question, why? And number two, what are the implications, negative and positive?
Right, so I think I wouldn't describe where we're at now as the greatest discovery in in world history. If we confirm that some of these do have an extraterrestrial connection, that will be obviously a new Copernican moment. And that will be enormously disruptive to our worldview. And it will have manifest consequences, positive and negative. I do think, interestingly, Ronald Reagan actually spoke about this, and I tend to share his view. He addressed this at the United Nations, strangely, I'll come back to this and talk about the drones, because again, I think it's important to understand a little bit better what the trend has been, because we've been seeing a lot of very strange things. There it is. So in I believe it was 85, and some people think he made his statement. Now, of course, Ronald Reagan was one of two presidents who had seen a UFO himself. And he was on a campaign flight with his campaign staff and his private pilot, and they saw this light, and he I think typical of his character, told the pilot to follow it, to get close to it. He wanted to see what this thing was. And so they started pursuing it, and as they started to get closer, it just went straight up and disappeared. So he had exposure, as Jimmy Carter did, to this issue, and some interest in the topic. Some people think he'd gotten some classified briefings and knew a lot more, but he raised this issue, and he thought it could help us to recognize a common bond among societies. And I think indeed it could have. That would be the positive aspect of this, that it would reframe international security relations in potentially a way that mitigated a lot of the hostility between us and rival powers, and compelled us to collaborate. I think it's hopeful that when the space program began, it was kicked off by Sputnik, and that was fear of the Russians, and it was a national security issue. But as it progressed, it became a collaborative project, and we started, going to space with the Russians. So the positive side would be that. The negative side would be short-term, potentially. So much of it depends on how this comes about. So, if it's in, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, everybody panics, it's horrible, If it's something that's sort of gradual and benign and people start to realize, and this is why I wanted to bring up the history part, if this becomes more prominent and more credible publicly, and people realize this has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, it's not potentially as disturbing and frightening.